Welcome to the magical journey beyond mediocrity, where the mystical and the practical become aligned. You're listening to Meant for More, the Seeker's Guide to Success, with your host, Seeker's Guide and coach, Kristen Lloyd. Kristen guides you through mindset shifts to increase your consciousness and live your best life. So let's leave mediocrity behind and step into your magical, magnificent life with Kristen.
Welcome back, everyone, to Meant for More, the Seeker's Guide to Success. I am your host and Seeker's Guide, Kristen Lloyd. I am so grateful that you've all tuned in today for the show. I am so excited for today's guest and for today's show. This is episode 7 of the Meant for More show. Today, our special guest is Julie Morey. Julie Morey, MSW, is the founder of Julie Morey Coaching. She offers divorce recovery coaching, relationship coaching, lifestyle design, and transitional coaching for women. She is passionate about helping women reach their full potential. She is also a contributing author to Mind Body Green, The Huffington Post, and Elephant Journal. She is also the published author of her book, Travel, Sex, and Train Wrecks, which can be found on Amazon.com. And it's an amazing read. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. And I know you have an amazing story to share, which is why I'm so excited that you're here, because it's so different.
Thanks.
So you do divorce recovery coaching, and that is different from the run-of-the-mill like life coaching, and it really offers a specific experience to women in transition who are going through divorce, overcoming divorce, and that's a pivotal point in a woman's life. How did you come upon divorce recovery coaching?
Well, obviously, I guess. All right, I'm divorced. So for me, sort of what happened was it was really one of those things where the universe sort of just moved things into place in sort of a bold way. I got married at 23, and my parents have been married 50 years. So I come from and both my best friends are married one to their high school sweetheart, one to her college sweetheart. And my sister's happily married. So I come from this background actually of really stable, happily married couples. But after 10 years of marriage, I was living overseas in Taiwan, and my ex had started drinking, and it just came to the point where there was no way that I could stay in the marriage, even though I wanted to. And so I made that really tough decision to get divorced. And I was overseas at the time, so I actually got divorced when I was in Taiwan, and then I spent a year living in Taiwan and teaching English by myself, and I traveled for a couple years, and I came back to the U.S., and I'd spent that time really figuring out how to move forward for my divorce, because it was one of those things that I really struggled with. And I had read a ton of books. I'd done a 10-day silent retreat in Thailand. Used a lot of my social work background to kind of figure out tools to help me move forward. And when I came back to the U.S., completely unintentionally, I met this girl who was like, "Oh, I'm starting this women's group. You should come." And I was like, "Great." And it ended up being almost all young divorced women, like late 20s, early 30s, divorced without kids. I was like, wow, I am not the only one in the whole world that got divorced, because I really honestly thought I was. And so I ran into this group of women that were all dealing with a lot of the same issues that I had, how to let go of the guilt, and how to let go of the shame, and how to move forward, and how to get unstuck. And so I started coaching really informally around that. And then as I started doing that and really seeing that it was making a difference, I sort of developed a 4-week sort of coaching program around it, designed just to help women move forward from divorce. And that's been my divorce recovery coaching that I've been doing now for the last 2 years.
That's amazing. I think that process of traveling, it sounds like that was a very healing journey for you.
It was. Well, one of the things that, I say to the women that I coach is I'm like, you have to find something that you're passionate about because, when you're in that process of getting divorced, especially in the beginning, your focus is very much on the ending of the marriage and dealing with the divorce and all of that. But once that divorce is finalized, you suddenly have this huge amount of time and you have to fill it with something. And if you don't find something that you're passionate about, something that lights you up, that's going to help you to focus and move forward in a positive way, you're going to continue to keep looking back. So for me, it was travel. That's what I filled my time with. For some of the other, I have one woman who went back to school. Someone took a yoga teacher training course. Someone took improv. It's really a matter of figuring out what it is that you've always kind of wanted to do or what lights you up and, throwing yourself into that.
So, the other thing that's interesting is you said that you felt like you were the only one. And for the group that you went to, I've actually had quite a few clients who were not married. So this is an interesting, not caveat, but like aside that's similar, who were in, let's say, monogamous relationships for 5+ years. So living together, one was living with her fiance for 12 years. One was living with a boyfriend for 10, 8, 5. I've had a lot of clients like that then the relationship just fell apart. So they were not married. Would women who are in these long-term monogamous relationships, it's not a divorce, there's not a legal paper, but would they benefit from divorce recovery coaching? Because although there is no legal paperwork, it's still similar to a divorce, isn't it?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's the thing. It's the same process. It's the process of letting go. It's the process of figuring out how to move forward. It's the process of redesigning your life and figuring out what it looks like now that you're single. It's a process of continually, checking in to make sure that you're being positive and looking and not falling into, negative thought patterns or blaming or, that kind of thing. So definitely. And that's one of the reasons that, just recently, really, I've sort of expanded my coaching per se, because I don't want anyone to think, oh, she just does divorce recovery. That doesn't work for me. I also do relationship coaching, which is essentially anyone dealing with a breakup, anyone just struggling with a relationship, anyone who feels like they're continually sort of falling into relationships with unhealthy patterns. And then also life transition, anyone that's dealing with a life transition, which could be a breakup. It could also be a marriage. It could also be a pregnancy. I mean, it could be a job change. But I'm really trying to expand and open up my coaching so that more people can benefit.
Right. No, that's really important. And I completely agree. I think that, it's not just the divorce part, because life, we're always in a transition, right? Life is never a stagnant thing. We're always changing and moving forward and growing. So, and different people have different struggles. And that's why I love coaching so much, because it helps to move people forward. Right. And, so, the travel piece, I think, is really huge on your specific journey. And you know what? I didn't think of it until just now, but it kind of, a total different segue. It kind of reminds me of like how Stella got her groove back. Do you because it's so, and I don't remember the movie. I just remember that there was a breakup or something like that, and she went on vacation. But what, just based on travel adventure, because you were overseas when your marriage, broke down, like what, whether it's before or after, how does travel come into all this? Clearly it was part of how you healed, but when we talk about your best travel adventure stories, what do you have that kind of really helped you to grow, not just recover, but to grow and to get to know yourself? So what travel adventure stories really made a difference in your life?
Well, I think there's a couple different there's a couple different kinds, I guess, so to speak. So for for me, one of the trips that I remember the most was, so my ex and I were actually still married, and we had a trip planned to Borneo. And the night before we were supposed to leave, things had been not well that week. We had been particularly fighting a lot. And the night before we were supposed to leave, it was midnight, and he was drunk, and he said, "We're not married anymore, and I'm not going with you." And I went back to my room, and I packed his bag, and I woke him up at 5 a.m. And I really thought once he woke, once he kind of sobered up a little bit, he would come. And I remember begging him to come on this trip, and he wouldn't come. And so I was like, well, I've never traveled by myself, but I'm not going to let him ruin this, and I'm going to go and do this. So I went on this trip by myself, and it was the most amazing trip. And I had this one incident where I had made a rather foolish decision to transfer buses in the middle of the night because I didn't want to lose a day of traveling. There was a direct bus during the day, but during the night there was 2 different buses. And so this bus drops you off at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. I mean, nowhere. And it's just sort of these covered up fruit stands and a dirt road and a couple shacks and sort of some sort of restaurant that's closed.
In Borneo.
Huh?
In Borneo.
In Borneo, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm by myself in the middle of nowhere. It's the first time I've ever traveled by myself. I'm terrified. And the bus that's supposed to transfer never comes. And so I end up sleeping pretty much outside in the middle of nowhere. And I remember, I remember this moment where I had to actually pee outside and I was sure that people were watching me, and I was crying, and I was so upset. And I was scared, and then I eventually fell asleep, and I woke up in the morning, and I realized that I was still alive. I hadn't been raped or killed, or nothing bad had actually happened. And I figured out the next bus came along, and I got myself to this. It was this amazing wildlife preserve that I was supposed to go to, and I spent 2 days there, and before that, I had met some amazing people, and as I continued, I went scuba diving, and I stayed at this hostel, and met some other amazing travelers. And I remember sitting outside and eating seafood and drinking beers. And I learned, from that experience, I realized that I could get around on my own. And then as I continue to meet people, I realized I can meet people on my own. I can travel on my own, and I can do these things. And even when the worst thing that I could possibly imagine happened, it really wasn't the worst thing. And I realized that I could do this. I could live on my own. I could leave a bad marriage. I didn't have to be scared anymore. Because I think I stayed for a while as well, because one, I thought I could make things better. And two, because I didn't want to be alone. I didn't think I could do it. And so that was probably my first really pivotal travel experience. I don't know if it's a travel adventure experience. But then, as I went on and I traveled, I remember hiking up to the top of this hill in Angkor Wat, where there's these beautiful ruins, and the monks, all in their orange robes, they sing. At sunset, they sing as the sun goes down. And I remember being up on top, looking over all the ruins with these monks, and I had this group of friends that I had met there. And it was just another one of those moments where I was like, this is amazing. And this is an experience I would have never had, if I hadn't traveled. And that was definitely a point where I just sort of started reflecting on my marriage and my life and how I was going to move forward. And then I did a 10-day silent retreat in Thailand. And that was, I would say, probably the single most pivotal thing. Because up till that point, while I've been traveling and doing a lot of running and not necessarily a lot of stopping and reflecting, I was having a great time, but that was the 10 days where I was able to really stop and sit in silence and reflect on a lot of things and let go of a lot of things from my marriage, and move forward.
That's amazing. What I hear when you were talking was when you decided to go to Borneo without your husband, you chose you. Mm-hmm. You chose you. And it didn't mean that you didn't choose the marriage, but you weren't going to let him ruin it. You weren't going to just sit there with him and let him run your life. You chose you and you
Right.
said, I'm going to go. I'm going to do this for me. If you don't want to go, you know, that's on you. And so that seems very pivotal. And of course, because I have the 11 C's of a seeker, which one of them is clarity, the other one is courage, and another one is connection. Those are the ones that I just jotted down, is that you sought clarity, and you sought clarity of who am I? What do I want? Where am I going? And you went for it, and you went for it out of courage. You just took the courage and you went because you chose you in that moment. And that's why I think it's so pivotal is it doesn't sound like you had a lot of time. You know, a lot of times people hem and haw like, oh, what should I do? What's my next step? You know, and the decision making, should I stay with him? Should I take care of him? Should I, you know, and at that point, you were very brave in that you chose you, because that's one of the things I'm sure you see, but I see as well, is that many women will forego choosing themselves. They choose other people over themselves. It's like the curse of women almost. We all are born with this helping, nurturing, you know, that's our the natural feminine that we have, is to nurture and to love and to care for. But in that moment, it's almost like something clicked inside of you and you realized, hey, who's going to take care of me?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And it was one of those things too, where I had just come to that point where I looked at what was happening in my relationship, in my marriage. And I was like, at that point, I had spent 4 years trying to sort of, I guess, fix things. I don't know if that's the right term, but to get to that place. And I realized that I could spend the rest of my life managing him and managing the marriage and trying to make it work, and never really having what I needed. Or I could take this chance and go out on my own and then potentially have the life that I wanted to lead. And that was the best decision I could have ever made, because 6 years later now, I've been to 71 countries. I've written a book. I've traveled all over. I've started my own business. I was this very one-dimensional person while I was married, and now I've become this three-dimensional, amazing person. And I would have never had that if I hadn't taken that leap of faith and left something that wasn't working, but that was manageable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And also within a marriage, I think the other point here is that there's a certain identity that maybe you had while you were in that marriage, and that women have when in a relationship. We talk about it, we're all whole, complete people, but we talk about, this is my other half. And so there's a certain persona that you have when you're in a marriage or in a relationship that when you leave, that's where the discovery process begins again, and you start anew and fresh, because now you need to figure out who you are without that person.
Right.
And it sounds like that's kind of where you moved away, but you started that process, started that healing even before you, let's say, left the marriage, like in those 2 trips where you gained the courage through those experiences where you said, okay, I can do this on my own. Like I can do this. I don't need anybody else. But the other part that I heard was your connection. You connected with other people as you, which also gave you the confidence to say, I can do this. Like I can do this. Whereas I think many women wonder, how can I? Because there's fear there about the growth, about overcoming the loss, because it is a loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I would agree with that. It's a huge loss. And again, like I said, I think that's why it's so important to find the coach and the things that you need to help fill that, so that you can move forward in a healthy way.
Right. Right. So clearly we're talking about travel and how you've credited travel with helping you heal from divorce.
Mm-hmm.
For other, and I think that you've given some information, how can other people who, let's say, don't have access to travel because they're overcoming a divorce, let's say with children, or they're overcoming a relationship and they have, a job where they can't do this specific traveling. What recommendations would you have for them? Like, clearly coaching is a recommendation to talk with someone to kind of get through and overcome where they are. But what are maybe your top 3 tips for someone who can't do the travel aspect?
Well, as I kind of touched a little bit on this, but I always say there's I call it the 5 secrets to surviving and thriving after a divorce. One is mindset. Like, I feel like in a divorce or any relationship that you break up from, like, you have to make the decision that you're going to make this a positive experience and not a negative experience, because you could either choose to continue to look backwards and to be like, oh, I wish and I want this, or to be angry. And that's not going to serve any purpose. It's not going to help you to move forward, especially if you have kids. It's so important, especially for them, to make that decision that you're going to make this a positive experience. And I think that that's huge, because that changes the whole way that you look at the process and the divorce and things like that, and how you interact with your ex and how you help your children and how you take care of yourself. The second piece I always say is self-care. You absolutely have to take care of yourself during this time. If you can't travel, that's fine. Go away for the weekend, or just take a day to yourself. I tell the women that I coach, make a list of all the things that you can do for yourself. And they can, some of them could only be 5 minutes, some could be an hour. And then depending on what time you have, go back and, if you find that you have an extra 10 minutes of downtime during the day, look at your list. What can you do for 10 minutes? Like, I just took up coloring. I find that amazingly therapeutic. So have your self-care list. Figure out the things that make you happy, that light you up, that are good for you, and make sure that you're doing different things off that list and you're really taking that time for yourself, because that is so important during this process. And part of that is having a morning routine, having that thing that you do every single day that gives you that just sense of equilibrium, because your life is in chaos. But if you have 15 minutes every morning where the first thing you do is you wake up, you take a deep breath, you set a positive intention for the morning, you do some journaling, you do 5 minutes of meditation, you drink your water. It might only be 15 minutes, but you do that every morning, and that sets your day, which again is really important. I talked about finding your passion. So like I said, for me, it was travel. For you, it might be gardening or yoga or improv, but figure out what that is, and use that to put your energy and your focus on, instead of, again, the negative aspects. And then I always say affirmations. Have those positive affirmations. Again, I tell the women that I coach, we, at the beginning of our first session, we always create an affirmation for them. Like, so one of my clients, I'm a smart, beautiful woman who's achieving her goals. Because one of the things that she was worried about was going into court and seeing her ex, and she really wanted to come across confident and not lose sort of her mojo in the courtroom, so to speak. And so I said, well, let's create this affirmation. And then whenever your mind starts to loop or you start to feel fearful, you can just refocus yourself on this. And that helped her a lot. I had another client who, she had a personal one as well, but then she also had one that was just, I'm not responsible for my ex. That really helped her to refocus when she started feeling guilty or feeling like she needed to give in to a lot of his demands for different things. So I say, have your main affirmation, and have several other ones that you use that are all positive and short that you can use to keep you focused. And then like you mentioned, having a support. Choosing to surround yourself with the people that are going to build you up, that are going to help you be positive. The coach that's going to let you cry and scream and yell and say all the things that you feel like you can't say, and then be like, okay, now what do we do? What's the next step? So those are, I guess, the 5 things that I always say are sort of pivotal in the process of moving forward from any breakup. And you can also adjust and adapt a lot of those just to your own life as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing. I think that's just when going through something, I think that there is a state of like panic and catastrophe and, where do I go from here? And those are particularly grounding because they're all applicable, right? So people tend to go to, what do I do? Who can I talk to? And sometimes your best friend, can sit there and say, oh, he's a jerk, he's this, he's that, but they're not necessarily going to say, how do you move forward? Like you can have somebody there to, with the Ben and Jerry's and the wine bottle.
Right.
But that's not necessarily what's going to get you to where you want to go. It's definitely probably the first thing that we all think of when your best friend comes over and you're sulking because this is a traumatic event, but then you've got to pick up the pieces and move forward. And so those are some excellent tips. With regards to the travel piece, while you were talking, I just started thinking, I know I said how Stella got her groove back. And then I started thinking about like Eat, Pray, Love. Like, that wasn't your intention when you went overseas. Like you did not go on this trip to recover from divorce. It was more that you were already there and your marriage broke down and you said, where do I go from here? So how did continuing the travel at that point versus coming back to the US like straight away, right? So you just continued to travel and teach in Taiwan, and then you just continued to travel from there. And that helped you heal from your divorce. What, tell us a little bit more about that, about where you went and kind of that recovery process, because you were already overseas versus, hi, I'm in the US and I'm getting a divorce and now I'm just going to go travel the world. That's a whole different setup.
Yeah, well, so I spent that year in Taiwan, and during that time, I just was doing a lot of processing, and I was reading a lot of different books, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I knew I wasn't ready to come back to the U.S. I wasn't ready to. It was too much to come back and deal with all of that, and so I planned this trip, this 7-month trip through Southeast Asia. So I essentially backpacked through Southeast Asia, and I had never traveled. Like I said, besides that trip to Borneo, I had never traveled by myself, and I really had no idea what to expect. And I arrived in Thailand, and I went down to the island of Koh Phi Phi, and they have this beach, and all along the beach are these different restaurants and bars, and they all have music playing, and there's fire shows, and there's just people dancing. And I remember that my first night I went out by myself. I met this girl, and we actually were sharing a room together. I met her on the ferry, but she wanted to sleep or whatever. And I went out by myself, and I'm dancing, and this absolutely gorgeous Italian guy comes up and starts dancing behind me. And he turns me around, he kisses me, and he goes, "Bella, Bella." And I was like, wow, this is definitely not like traveling when you're married.
That's awesome.
And I just began to see that there is this whole world out there of travel and things like that. But I think that was a big difference, was already being overseas and being in that mindset. It was very easy to transfer that into, let me just continue now to backpack for 7 months. But that trip ended up being so amazing and so pivotal in my growth and my transformation that I came back from that, and I was back in the U.S. for a few months. I wrote a book about the whole adventure. That's Travel, Sex, and Train Wrecks. And then I decided to go back overseas again. And I went to South America for 7 months and backpacked. And that was, again, I was lucky and that I had the money from teaching English to be able to travel and to do that. But it definitely opened up my whole world and gave me a different perspective.
So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about your book. Was that like a journaling experience that you were writing while you were overseas, or did you write the book when you came back about your experience?
Well, so I had a blog that I was writing while I was traveling, and then I was doing a lot of journaling because that's one of the ways that I process and I heal. Um, and I had an entire journal just for my 10-day silent retreat. And so when I came back, all my friends and family were like, "Well, you should write a book." And I was like, "I'm not going to write a book. Everybody writes a book. That's what everybody does." And but that idea kind of got in my head, and then I just kind of woke up one day and started writing, and the whole idea for the book just sort of wrote itself almost. And I mean, I had an editor, and she helped a lot with teaching me not just how to tell stories, but how to almost draw a picture when I'm writing, so that people could actually be there and see sort of what I was experiencing. And it was a hard book to write because it was so personal, and I put so many personal details into it. But I felt like it was really important because I feel like a lot of people get divorced and they kind of have some crazy adventures, or they sleep around, or they do these things, and nobody talks about it. Like a guy is told, "Oh, when you get divorced, you go off and you sow your wild oats, and you go bang some girls and show that you're single." But women, it's a double standard. And if we go off and we have sex after we get divorced, or sleep around a bit, or figure out who we are sexually, we're judged more harshly for that. So, part of my trip was figuring out who I was sexually. And I wanted to write about that, and write about my experiences traveling and what I learned from my divorce, and share that with other women so that they didn't feel alone in the process. And so that's what I did. And that's why I kind of felt compelled to write it.
I think that's hugely courageous and, super vulnerable of you to put yourself out there like that. And I've read it, and I think it's amazing. And I think that it had to have taken a huge courageous leap to write all of that, because it's so deeply personal. And you can be judged by other women or by men about your experiences, but it's also about how you grew and how it helped you heal and how you found yourself. And I think that going through divorce, and I know I've never been divorced, but I will say that from the people that I've coached and counseled who have gone through divorce, there is this piece of, am I still sexy? Am I still wanted, desired, needed? And so just that experience of you talking about the Italian guy, I think really helps to validate those feelings after divorce. Is, yes, someone else desires me. Someone else finds me sexy. And that's huge.
Yeah. I mean, that was hugely important. I talk about in the book, I talk about this 19-year-old guy that I hooked up with when I was 33 traveling, and that in that last one. And I was like, I was like, yes, I've still got it, and I that was a huge affirmation for me. It was definitely not the best life choice I've ever made. But it was something that I needed. I needed to have that experience to feel like, yes, I've still got this. I'm still sexy. I'm still attractive. I can still, pull guys, so to speak. And so it's funny because sometimes I'll read back on that in that book or things like that, and I think, God, I'm such a different person now, than what I was when I wrote that book. And sometimes I feel, because it is so deeply personal, and I feel like I'm in such a different life space now, but I still think that what I wrote is relevant and important, and so I still put it out there for people to read.
Right. And following divorce or following the breakup, I know in your situation, it was the alcohol and addiction, but, some people break up because of cheating or affairs, and then the other partner is left feeling, am I not desirable? And it's sometimes not about that even, at all, but that it leads to self-blame and almost like this self-destruction of, am I not good enough? And then it kind of goes full circle back to this whole good enough, am I not pretty enough? Am I not thin enough? Am I not why did this person do this to me? And they reflect it all back to themselves instead of saying, oh, he was just a douchebag or,
Right. Exactly.
he
Exactly.
chose himself, or, she, because there are men who get divorced and for the same reason, but, it may not have had anything to do with you as the partner. It had to do with the decision they made, completely separate of you, in that they weren't thinking of you, and it wasn't about your love as a unit or your marriage. It was about their decision to go do something on their own with someone else. But I think that that's where women especially tend to internalize and say, oh, this is all my fault. I did this. And that I think is part of the recovery.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that is it's so important that you touched on that, because that's one of the things that, I touch on in my coaching. And that, again, a reason that I feel like it's so important. Because anytime a relationship ends, it's two people. It's never one person. And it generally has more to do with the other person's issues than it does with you. It's not about you not being adequate. It's about the other person not being able to properly communicate or to deal with their issues, or that they're just a douchebag. But
I love that.
Really, I mean, it doesn't. This is what I feel like it's so important for women to understand. Like, it's like when you go on a date and you think, gosh, this was a great date, and you come home and you wait for him to call, and he doesn't call. And you think, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Was my dress not pretty enough? Did I laugh too loud? And you start questioning all these things you did on the date. When, most likely it has to do with the fact that maybe he's gone on a date with 3 different girls that week, and it's just, he felt he connected with another girl better, or maybe there's a lot of things going on in his life, and he really enjoyed the time with you, but he realized that he's not in the space to have a relationship. Or maybe he really liked you and thought you were great. He just didn't think that you were the one, per se, and that has nothing to do with you or who you are as a woman, as a person. It just means that you didn't connect with this person. And we need to stop psychoanalyzing ourselves and going back and trying to see all the things that are wrong with us and just, and instead look at it from, okay, what can I learn from it? How can I move forward? I'm amazing. It just wasn't right with this person.
Yeah.
And I get very frustrated in my coaching with these women who want to beat themselves up, or who want to make it about them, or all the things that they did wrong or that are wrong with them. And I'm like, no, it's not, it just, this wasn't the right person for you. You can go now, you're going to find the guy who is, and he's going to think you're sexy and beautiful and amazing. And that's the person you're supposed to connect with.
Well, and I think, again, not to jump off on a tangent, but I think that goes back to standards, and especially when women are internalizing, what did I do? What can I do better? I mean, yeah, we can all improve, right? But what's wrong with me? When we pivot to picking ourselves apart and finding what's wrong with ourselves, it's a lot more pessimistic and it's a lot more negative versus, oh, that person didn't like me. Okay, next,
Exactly.
And shifting to, okay, maybe the universe saved me on that one. Maybe it was just not right for me. Instead of looking at, there's somebody better who's a better match, and looking forward, the internalization of what's wrong with me seems to be the instant, and I see women all the time doing it. I used to do it. I think it's just the go-to thing that happens. And so shifting that, pivoting to something else, which is, okay, there's somebody who's a better match. That's hugely important, but that also comes with self-esteem, self-worth, building confidence, because that's a real confidence killer when you're breaking up, or if someone's not validating you. But that's also, if you need the validation, then that's typically a sign that, oh, maybe I'm not loving myself the way I need to, self-validation versus expecting it from others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you already covered this, but I was going to ask you, what do you recommend for women who are struggling to move forward from divorce? though you'd given the 5 tips of surviving and thriving, which I think are awesome, but then you also talked about journaling. So would you recommend journaling, or do you have any other recommendations for women who are struggling to move forward from divorce?
Yeah, well, definitely journaling. I have a couple of exercises, particularly around journaling that I use. One of them I call howling at the moon, which is the idea of, and this can actually just be a journaling or verbally, but it's basically writing down without editing every single thing that you are feeling. Like because I feel like when we get divorced, a lot of times we are expected to smile sometimes at the right spaces and be like, oh, well, yeah, it's really unfortunate, but I'm doing great. Or say the right things, because you might have kids and you don't want to say, well, yeah, I left him because he's a cheating bastard. He can't keep his dick in his pants. Those are things that you generally don't want to say to people.
Right.
But you're still feeling that. And so being able to sit down and just write it all out without having to edit it, without having to be nice, where you can just swear and say all the things that you want to say and curse and scream and yell, and get all of that out, I feel is very important. So I call it howling at the moon, and just journaling everything, and letting that kind of that catharsis take place. And then I usually generally recommend you rip it up. And then you go and do something really awesome for yourself. Don't stay in that negative space, and give yourself a time limit of, say, like 15 minutes. And then have some plan in place to go out with your girlfriends, or to go to do a spa day, or to do something for yourself. But just being able to express all of those emotions and get them out and write everything, I think is important. Even going somewhere. One of my friends used to go up to the roof and just scream and yell. And sometimes you don't even have words, and you just need that space to do that. And then the other journaling exercise that I always recommend is I call it a letter to the ex. I know a lot of people going through a divorce can't get the closure that they want. I know for me, like, my ex never to this day has admitted that he had any responsibility in the divorce. It was all me. And I've had a couple clients like that as well. And they're like, I just don't want closure. I just want him to say he's sorry. I just want him to apologize. I just want him to admit his part in it. And so you're writing a letter, and you're writing it like your ex is writing it to you. And he's saying all the things to you that you need to hear, and all the things that you wish he'd said. And in this letter, he apologizes. There's a scene actually, or in the book, Eat, Pray, Love, where she kind of does this up on the rooftop in India with her ex. But it's that idea of him finally saying to you all the things that you need to hear. And it kind of shifts the pattern in the universe a little bit. It's still not the same, but being able just to put those words out there and to hear them helps you to shift and start that healing process and get unstuck. And so that's really important. And then I also recommend that you write a letter to your ex, and you say all the things to him that you feel like you need to say. And again, you can do it in a 2-part thing where you just do the free form, and you just write everything, and you're super angry. And then you go back and you actually edit it out and write something that is intelligent and meaningful. And you don't have to give it to him. But it's just that process of you writing that and processing those emotions, and then taking the time to read through them with either yourself or your coach or a friend, and then doing something symbolic to burn them or to rip them up or to let them go. That kind of thing, I think, helps a lot in that process of getting unstuck and letting go as you move forward with divorce. So those are a couple of the journaling exercises that I recommend. And I have some others. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is super important in the process, and finding a way to work through that. And there's some journal exercises around that. So different things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. The other thing that came to mind is sometimes if the person is still in love with the ex, they can focus on the good times, which then may make the recovery harder, versus focusing on for lack of a better term, the negative, like what is the real reason for the breakup? So if since we're talking about women here, let's just say the woman is still hanging on to the relationship and still wants the relationship versus, okay, I'm done, it's over. So when they're writing this letter, if they still have these feelings of love, how, is there any specific recommendations for helping them to kind of not cut the cord, although cut the cord sounds, in terms of moving on, they might not be ready. Like there are tons of different, situations, but that's one of the things that I knew is there are some people who are really ready to move on and they have the courage to leave the toxic relationship and say, okay, enough, I choose me. Very similar to what you did. And then there's some women who are still hanging on and they leave because they have to, whether the partner has met someone else or what have you, and they're, let's say, destroyed, but they still have love there. Are there any different recommendations for the people who still hold love? Like, would you still recommend that they write a letter to the ex or that they process through their emotions and forgiveness? And
absolutely. I mean, it's still the same process. I mean, for me, yeah, I left, but I didn't want to leave. There was still a huge part of me that loved him. And, I would still say that 60% of our marriage was positive, but the other 40% was so destructive that I couldn't stay. And so I have these duality of these great memories and these things that I loved about him mixed with the knowledge that I had to leave. And I think most relationships are like that. They're never black or white. And so I think it's actually really important to remember the good and the bad, and to allow yourself to grieve and to mourn and to let go of that person and remember what you learned from them, what you loved about them, and the good times as well as the bad. And I think that's the key, is keeping that balance, because even if you're still in love with them, there was still a reason that the marriage ended. There were still things that weren't working. So make sure that you're aware of those, that you keep those in mind, and you balance those. It's like when we go back and look at a photograph and say you went on this trip and, during this trip, it rained the whole time and you got food poisoning and, you broke your phone, but there was this 1 hour where the sun came out and you ran outside and you snapped this selfie. Well, if you only looked at that picture and you were like, wow, that was the best trip ever. Look, it was so sunny and beautiful. And look how much we're smiling. That really isn't a reflection of the entire trip. It's good that you can focus on the positive, but that's not realistic to say, oh, that whole trip was great. You can definitely still be like, wow, you know what? I'm so glad the sun came out and we had that moment and that it was beautiful and we were able to have this fun experience within all these other things that happened. But the trip wasn't all 100% good. and it's the same thing with a marriage. It's keeping that balance. And I think journaling helps with that as well. Because it is important to reflect on both of those. And for me, the other thing that helped a lot was, what did I learn and how did I grow and what good things did I get out of the marriage and what can I do going forward? And to focus on moving forward. That's I think the most important thing that I can impart. Even if you're still in love with someone, it's still, the marriage is ended. And if you keep looking back and saying, what if, you're never going to be able to move forward. Yeah.
Completely agree. I love that. So you've described a lot about what you work on with clients, but clearly it's not just divorce recovery, although we have talked about that a lot. It's also women in transition, women who are making career changes, women who are, just in transition in general. So can you describe how you help women move forward from divorce. Well, you've already kind of described how you help women move forward from divorce, but also how you help women who are in transition. Like, what other transitions do you work with people on, and how, what does that look like? How do you move them forward?
Well, so I always say anybody can benefit from having a life coach. I have a life coach. You look at Oprah, you look at Deepak Chopra. Anyone who wants to be successful in life has a coach, because you realize that you really can't do it alone. And if you know that you're here and you want to be over here, if you're just in a space in your life where you're like, I know that I could be more intentional in my day. I know that I could have more joy. I know that I could be more organized. Or, you're just like, I had that breakup a few years ago and I'm doing okay, but I still feel like there's some issues around that I need to work out. Or, your kids are leaving for college, or you just, that you kind of want a career change, or you just kind of have that sense of like, God, I just feel like I want something else, but I'm not sure what it is. That's where a coach is, or even if your life is going and working great, but you're like, I still know that I could be better, that's where I've sort of expanded into, because a lot of the things that I do, even that I have been doing in my divorce recovery coaching, can still translate into regular life. Like, you should have a self-care plan. You should have a morning routine. You should be intentional in your day. You should be finding what you're passionate about. You should be looking at your life positively. So a coach really comes in there and helps you examine those areas that maybe you haven't looked at, or those routines that you've sort of fallen into without even thinking, or some unhealthy behavior patterns or thought patterns or things like that. And so that's what I love about coaching, because it's really exciting. I get to basically come in there and work with people who pretty much have it together. Even these women who I'm working with in divorce recovery, like, they're smart, they're successful, they have careers. They just need that little extra boost to help them get unstuck and move forward. And that's kind of what life coaching does. And so it's fun. It's enjoyable, because I see people just thriving and making progress and moving forward in ways that they haven't before. So I always say, anybody can benefit from coaching. And I do a free half-hour consultation, to work with people and see, whether we'd be a good fit and things like that. Because I feel like that's really important as well.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
I asked this question of all of my guests, and, clearly you stumbled upon coaching through your own experience. But when was there a moment when you realized that you were meant for more? Did that happen while you were still married, because you were traveling? Like, you knew that your life, what you were meant for bigger things. Everybody's definition of success is different. But at what point in your life did you say, yeah, I'm meant for more than just status quo, than just mediocrity? Like, at what point did that happen for you? Because clearly you're not living a mediocre life. You're living a life that you designed.
Uh-huh.
So what was that for you?
I think it happened when I was traveling. I think I've always sort of had that desire, but I think I got really caught up in my marriage and things like that. And then once I started traveling and seeing how big the world was and what the options were, I was like, I can't settle for living in the US and having the 9-to-5 job and that kind of thing. I want more out of my life. And so that's, I think, why I took the second trip and kept traveling. And then I went to Russia and worked as a nanny. And I had all these amazing experiences and started my own business. Because somewhere along the way when I was traveling and just looking at the world and seeing how big and amazing it was, I thought, I can't fit myself into this little box. Like, I have to continue to just strive to do more.
Right. That's amazing. I love it. So how can someone connect with you if they're interested in coaching, and where do people find you? I know that you also have a free private Facebook group for women who are going through divorce, and that's another place where they can connect with other women who are going through divorce as well, right?
Yeah. So yes, I have a Facebook group for thriving after divorce, and then my website is www.juliemorey.com, and that there you can find the link for my private Facebook group. You can sign up for a free half-hour consultation for coaching. Let's see. And then sorry, I was trying to find the link for the Facebook group. Let's see here. Okay, so the Facebook group is facebook.com/group/thriving after divorce. That's a private Facebook group. JulieMorey.com is my website where you can sign up for the free half-hour consultation and see all of my coaching packages. And on Kindle is my book, Travel, Sex, and Train Wrecks. So those are probably the way that you can get a hold of me.
Yeah. And I would definitely recommend everybody get that book because it's amazing. And I think it also shares more about your story and more of the stories of your experience following your divorce. And it also, it's a very liberating book. I think that I know it was so eye-opening to the courage that you had and also the experiences that you had following your divorce and also, the travel experiences as well. So it's definitely an amazing book. So definitely on Kindle, on Amazon, Travel, Sex, and Train Wrecks. And then JulieMorey.com. I'm so glad that you were on today and that you took the time because you're on the West Coast right now. And so this is like super early in the morning for you. So I'm so grateful.
It's only it's not even 7 a.m. yet. I'm totally good.
That's awesome. All right. So for everybody, connect with Julie Morey, JulieMorey.com, and her Facebook group is Thriving After Divorce. You can also search in the Facebook for that and find the group. And thank you everyone for listening. It's been another great show. To continue this conversation, hop on over to the Seekers group on Facebook, which is my private group, www.facebook.com/groups/The Seekers Path. And until next time, know that you are meant for more and keep seeking. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to Meant for More, the Seeker's Guide to Success. But the fun doesn't end here. Head over to KristenLloyd.com for your Seeker's Guide workbook filled with exercises to help you go from mediocre to magically magnificent.